What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by the channel. Today's project is this green machine trimmer, and the problem is that in a previous video I found out that I needed a special part before I could fix this trimmer. Let's take a good look at it, find out what's wrong with it, and hopefully we can fix it. In this video, we try and repair this trimmer. However, it may not be the exact repair that you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. Now, when I first saw this trimmer, I knew there was something special about it, and apparently other people saw the same thing because there's been quite a bit of interest in getting it running. Now, if you missed the last video on this trimmer, I fixed the recoil to retract better. Now, it's not perfect, it's just better. I also took apart the carb and found out it to be exceptionally clean. That's also when I found a rather unique fuel tank grommet that had hardened and wouldn't seal anymore. Well, I finally found a part that would hopefully help me get this thing running. I'll start by taking off the fuel tank and replacing the grommet. Now, the return line is in great shape, but the fuel line and this grommet is the part that needs to be replaced since it no longer seals to the tank. Also, this brass port came out of the carb, so I need to remove it and reinstall it. There's also a really gross looking fuel filter still rolling around inside the tank, so that's going to need to be replaced as well. Now, I couldn't source the original fuel grommet, but I did find this 23mm grommet with 2 holes, which should work just fine. I also had this large fuel filter in my parts bin, and the last thing I need is some fuel line. Of course, I'm going to use some 3/16 of an inch Tygon line, which has proven itself to be very ethanol resistant. I'll start by cutting the fuel line at an angle and then inserting it into one of the holes. Now, this will be my fuel filter line, so I'll cut that angle piece off and then install the fuel filter to it. For the other hole, I'm going to insert a short piece of fuel line, and this time I'll try inserting it without cutting an angle on it. Then I'll cap it off so it doesn't leak, but for right now I'll leave it uncapped till I know the engine works. After that, I'll install the fuel filter and the grommet. Now, when inserting the grommet, use whatever method you want. I've heard to use 2-cycle oil to lube it, and even boiling the grommet to make it easier to install. Well, it's 99 degrees out here, so it should be pliable enough to install by hand. Whatever way you choose, just make sure it's seated all the way around the grommet. And before I forget, I'll remove the brass port from the old fuel line. Now, another option for this repair is to use an automotive grommet from an auto parts store. However, it may not be fuel rated, so it may become too soft to use. Now, the next step is to remove the carb from the engine and inspect it. Now, I already did this in the previous video, but it's been a long time since then, so I want to take another look. Now, on this style of carb, you only have to remove these 4 screws to replace the missing primer bulb and to check both diaphragms. After getting the retaining ring off, I have to make sure to remove whatever's left of the old bulb. So here's the metering diaphragm, and it's not in terrible shape, but it's got a few wrinkles in it, so I think I want to replace it so it works like it's supposed to. Now, it should be very flexible, but it's definitely hardened up just a bit. After removing it, take a note of how long the stem is in the middle. Generally, there are 2 sizes. One is barely visible, while the other one is about 1/10 of an inch long. This is the longer one. So this is the pumping diaphragm, and it's mostly made out of rubber, and it's still very pliable. Now, the only thing I want to check is that these 2 check valve flaps are flat and parallel with the rest of the diaphragm. The easiest way is to look at it from the side and make sure that the flaps don't stick out away from the diaphragm. These aren't sticking out, so I'm okay reusing this one. Before reassembling the carb, I want to reinstall that brass port. So this is the replacement diaphragm, and as you can see, it's extremely flexible. The last thing to check is that the stem in the middle is the same length as the original one. Now, I don't have a part number for this diaphragm. What I do is I look on Amazon or eBay and find one that looks like the original one. After making sure it's the right size, I'll start to reassemble the carb. The last thing though is I have to replace the primer bulb. Yes, technically it's a purge bulb, but I've even seen it described as a manual fuel pump, so it goes by many different names. Now there are two sizes of primer bulbs, and the smaller one is the size of a dime, while the larger one is the size of a nickel. If you're not sure, just order a kit that has both sizes. I wasn't sure myself, so I'm having to try both to find out, and as you can see, the smaller one fits the retaining plate, and just for fun, I'll try the larger one, and of course it's not going to fit. Once the carburetor is back together, I'll finally reinstall the fuel tank and then put the carb back onto the engine. Now once the fuel tank is in place, I can then cut the fuel line to length to where the carburetor will be. This of course is the fuel filter line, and it goes to the barbed brass fitting that I had to replace earlier. After connecting the fuel line, I'm going to press the primer bulb a few times just to make sure it draws fuel from the tank into the bulb and out the other port to the return line. Once that's done, I'll connect the return line and then connect the throttle cable. Now before you stab the carb onto the engine, don't forget to make sure that this gasket is in between the engine and the carb. After installing the carb and the filter base, I'll try to start it. I am absolutely shocked that this thing started and ran. This thing has been sitting for years, and I was pretty sure that this carb would be gummed up and I'd have to replace it. I shouldn't speak so soon though, because in one of my previous videos I was able to get a steel trimmer working after cleaning the carb from years of poor storage. However, the next day I tried to start it and it was having problems, and the day after that it didn't start at all, and in the end I had to replace the carburetor on that steel with one from Amazon. And of course the bigger problem though is that the trimmer head wasn't spinning. I did spin it by hand and it would spin freely, but it didn't seem to be connected to the engine, so it could either be a clutch or a drive shaft problem, or even something wrong with the gearbox. However, that will have to wait till a different video. So my question, is it worth continuing to repair this vintage trimmer? I'm not sure on the availability of the parts, but I can only imagine that some of these parts will be very difficult to find, and I might have to get creative yet again if I can't find the correct part. I know how I feel about this project, but I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask any questions, and I hope to see you in my next video.